Right, guys, I've waited a few days to finally let you guys see The Flash, enough people to watch it, who wanted to watch it, and now is time for the spoiler review. But what I've done this time is that I'm going to make it a little bit different. I thought instead of, because my no spoilers review, I felt, believe it or not, even though it's a no spoilers review, I felt like it was fairly comprehensive. So instead of kind of going throughout the movie step by step the way I did, talking about the pacing, the themes of the movie, so in and out again in this review like I did that one, I thought, well, why not ask you exactly what you want to hear from me with regards to spoilers. So that is what I've done, and there is a bunch of screenshots that I've got to go over here. It's probably going to be a very long blabbery sesh. I've got quite a bit to say. I'm wearing the headphones as well today because I had some mic issues, so it's actually really weird. I can hear my own voice in my head, so, well, the headset. Yeah, sometimes I have that as well. But let's just get into this. Let's get into the spoilers of the Flash movie. A bunch of people have asked this. So Spicy here saying, am I the only one absolutely dreading the very real possibility that we may be stuck with George Clooney as Batman? And Gustin saying here, so since George is Batman at the end, when he comes back, does that make him our new Batman? No, honestly, as James Gunn has said himself in a tweet of when, by the way, this cameo was already filmed, is it true you're casting George Clooney as the new main DCU Batman? He replies, in February, absolutely not. He's also stated many times that the DCU Batman for Brave and the Bold hasn't been cast yet. He said that it would be a few years older than Superman, not like dramatically like decades, but like a few years. Let's just say David Corrin Sweat is cast as Superman and he's playing like a 29 to 32-year-old. Bruce might be in his late 30s to, maximum early 40s, but not Clooney's age. I know some people might say Gunn is lying, but I'm telling you, with regards to this, thing at the end, I think what they wanted to do with Clooney compared to what the original ending was, which was actually Keaton appearing in that exact same scene. Like Barry, is coming out the courthouse, the appeal with his father, and Keaton's Batman rocks up. We then get the Batgirl movie in the old DCU future, and then, everything else. So I think what they wanted to do is kind of differentiate and lean away from Keaton, being at the very end, because they didn't want people to think that maybe Keaton was staying on. What I have to admit here is, no matter what, this whole movie being labeled the Flash Reset, even though it is technically the reset, is a bit of a messy thing to go with in terms of what they're calling their launch into their new DCU. I mean, it hasn't been expressively labeled that, but it has been referenced as the Flash Reset, which then goes into Blue Beetle, who is a DCU character, and then Aquaman 2, and then Creature Commandos, Waller, Superman Legacy, and whatnot. So I do completely understand how some people are viewing, oh, well, technically Barry restored the timeline. We're now into the DCU's timeline, and now George Clooney is Batman. So the way I look at this is, well, Clooney isn't going to be the Brave and the Bold Batman. Unless Gunn was straight up lying when he already answered that Clooney isn't going to be the DCU Batman, when he already said that the DCU Batman hasn't been cast yet, and I think that makes sense as to why it's still a little whiles away. And I don't think he is. The way I would look at this is that with all the timey-wimey feckery that happened in the movie, especially around the Chronobalt scene where you saw all of these worlds and universes colliding and collapsing, with all of this stuff that happened, and even with Keaton's example of the spaghetti in the bowl, it ends up with the multiverse. Some branches are closer than other ones, these inevitable intersections, but some are just a complete mess. I would just take that Barry, when restoring the timeline, ends up in a new one, so he doesn't quite obviously restore it the way he wanted to, because Clooney Batman is literally replacing Ben Affleck's Batman, so he's like, what the hell is going on here? Even though Barry, did you really learn your lesson? And again, we're going to get into that. Ezra's Barry, I would look at it as he's in that timeline, but the DC universe, Gunn's universe, is going to pick up in a similar timeline. So you might have Viola Davis's Amanda Waller still be in the Waller series. You might have the Peacemaker characters still be in Peacemaker Season 2 and the Waller series, and some other characters out there. But we're picking up on this road over here, this branch. We're not in the branch that I think is being left behind, with Ezra's Barry and George Clooney's Batman. And again, the reason why they used George Clooney's Batman, on top of just bringing him back, maybe to distance themselves away from what was originally the future direction. As I said, like, we were getting a Batgirl movie, Keaton was staying on to be the Bruce Wayne of the cinematic universe moving forward. So maybe they're like, okay, since we're not doing that anymore, let's reshoot the scene, bring in Clooney for a bit of a gag. But that doesn't mean that the ending of that movie is the future DCU. It can still technically serve as a reset for the DCU, again, with all the timey-wimey, Chrono Bowl, multiverse feckery that they got into, if that makes sense. It's just that, again, and this is confusing, I admit, they're not going to continue off on the Clooney road. They're going to continue off on how all of that mess in the Flash movie kind of affected all these other universes over here, and they're starting off on this road, you know? And that's James Gunn's universe with Peter Safran. And obviously, the whole reason why this is a bit of a mess is because this was a movie that has been made all throughout the whole big changes at Warner Brothers and Discovery, merging DC Studios, becoming a thing. Like, it was already shot long before even James Gunn came in and wanted this whole new direction. Again, with the whole Keaton staying on thing. Like, they had to make big changes there. So even though they're now calling it a Flash reset into James Gunn's DCU, and how it was a Flash reset into Keaton's new Bruce Wayne DCU and Sasha Calle Supergirl DCU, because they both survived in the original ending, it just doesn't work as well calling it the Flash reset into the DCU anymore, because even with the ending they gave us, it doesn't add up nicely, and unfortunately that's just a product of them trying to salvage and low-key retrofit this into what is now obviously a soft rebooted universe. So Turkey Sucks 5495 says, do you feel that the reveal of Barry 2 being Dark Flash was done well? Personally, I felt so pulled out of the story when that part of the story happened. I think there could have been a way better setup by making him a version of Zoom that idolized Barry, number one. But the death of his universe sent him over the edge and maybe into the negative speed force to get corrupted. I get that there was probably a lot of things cut out and left on the table since the DCU has become the new course correction. I just didn't like how they set that villain up, and he only showed up for the last minutes of the big conflict before his quick resolution. Sorry for the long comment, and thanks if you read this. So it's a bit of a weird thing, you know, that do I feel like Dark Flash, the reveal of Barry 2 being Dark Flash, was done well? Well, for me, it like wasn't surprising. I felt like it was insanely obvious from the promo material. Even if you want to go back to the toy leaks, it's like clearly the other Barry. So I wasn't surprised by it, but what I will say is, like what I said in my no spoilers review, is that it kind of was rushed. But there's this interesting factor to it in terms of how we had Dark Flash at the beginning of the movie, or near beginning, push Barry back into that specific time of when Barry is 18, so he can ensure his creation. But in terms of when you get to that climax of the movie in the Chrono Bowl, in the Speed Force, when he just kind of comes in, and he's like, it feels like he's only in it in hindsight for like 15 to 20 seconds, obviously a little bit more, before he tries to stab the older Barry and then just fades from existence. The thing for me is, all while I do find it somewhat entertaining, all while it being rushed and stuff as well, is that I feel like it's a bit of a harder sell. They don't get into anything specific, like did the younger Barry get into the negative speed force? Did he harness any of that? I mean, he did, like, you know, say, I am. And there was a bit of voice modulation on his voice when he said, I am the Flash. But I felt like in of itself, what propelled Barry to do this felt a little bit inorganic. Now, I know people might come back to me and say, but if your universe was dying, would you not like do this and do what Barry did Groundhog Day over and over and over and over again to try and fix it? Interesting question. I would. But I feel like the hard part to believe in of itself, I feel like with younger Barry, through what we saw, yes, they're defined differently. One grew up with parents, one didn't. This Barry is a bit more obnoxious, a bit more annoying. But I think what I struggle to believe is that this character, the younger Barry that we saw, fair enough that he was like, nobody dies, and he Groundhog Dayed it. And then our older Barry, after initially Groundhog Daying it, you know, trying to rerun it with the other Barry, realized, this isn't going to work. And he starts to learn his lesson with not every problem has a solution. But would the younger Barry, from what we've seen, who isn't insane, granted he grew up differently, but he's not insane, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, would he go on to literally try and attempt to save the Zod battlefield situation, not only for the next week, not for the next month, not for the next year, not for the next 10 years, but for, like, as you said, I have lived longer than you can dream, which infers, by the way, like, even if I want to be generous and say, like, he did it for the next 5 to 6 decades, because this is an old man Barry, but he says, I have lived longer than you can dream. That means, like, he could have been doing it a lot longer than 5 decades. But let's be generous. Let's say he's been doing the exact same thing we saw young Barry try and do out of the Corona Bowl. He comes back and he's like, come on, man, like, help me out kind of thing. He went to do that for the next 50 to 60 years, non-stop. Maybe he gets like a can of energy drink every now and again because of energy levels. But like, when you really grasp that for a minute, I feel like this Barry isn't insane. I think after maybe, I would completely give him a lot of attempts to try and do it. But I do believe at some point he would have just been like, okay, even if you want to go to the extreme, and he like went and did it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, again and again for like a few weeks. At some point after the 100th attempt, which I still think would be extreme, with the character that we saw in the movie, yes, before some people say, Bobo, I think you're missing the point, like this Barry's defined differently. Even with him growing up different, I think he would have tried to correct the situation only so many times to the point of where he'd been like, okay, but to do it for like 50, 60 years and possibly for longer than you can dream, I don't feel like they really, this is what I mean. If they somehow like built that side of it up in terms of, or like if they did explain that he kind of got corrupted by some negative speed force, because I do think that Dark Flash's lightning, just as he was about to kill the older Barry, it went like a bit pink. Not that it's red, but it definitely wasn't blue, but maybe that's a result of the like Kryptonian like shards he had in him. I don't know. I just felt like they could have done more. And I think that's my personal take about it. I felt like it wasn't so organic. It was a bit rushed. This younger Barry just immediately kind of snorted like 20 lines of coke and then just wouldn't stop like going at it. Like, it just wasn't the Barry. He's still Barry Allen, granted that he grew up differently. So it does feel rushed, or to kind of still, while I acknowledge, elevate the message of the theme of the film, which is to not every problem has a solution. I get that. Don't think that this is flying past my head. I just think, and I think that it's a really nice message in the movie, and it comes into very touching scenes, mainly with Ezra's older Barry, the one that goes back into the grocery store and where we practically almost all cried in the theater. Like, I got emotional at that moment at the end of the movie. But this part of it, I don't know. It feels like you kind of introduce this like really far-fetched thing to elevate that message up. While I think it will work for a lot of the general audience, maybe they might not think about it so much. So actually, I didn't think about maybe how Barry, while he is and has grown up differently from our Barry, the DCU Barry, would he have really gone on to like the end of time, or like I've lived longer than you can dream to do it again? And it's almost like he did take drugs and he acted like just completely differently, all in a very quick sequence of events. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Dark Flash. I actually don't dislike it as much as some people seem to. I mean, I acknowledge all the flaws in it, but I don't hate it. I did think it was an interesting idea, but I think what I'm thankful for on the bottom line is that it wasn't kind of like there was this big poised up villain in the movie. And I always use this as an example. If you love Black Adam, forgive me. But Black Adam, you can obviously say that Dwayne Johnson was the anti-hero / antagonist, but like not really. The main third act villain there was Sabak, who wanted to become the demonic Sabak because his great ancestor almost got there, but he didn't achieve it. So since he's a part of the heritage, I'm going to fulfill the great ancestor oath. And he became this little CG kind of demonic Sabak, and here's my zombie horde. And it was boring. It was pretty bad. At least this movie's villain, or I say villain, but like the villain is the introspective thing that Barry goes through. At least there's more substance in it. Now, while there is a physical manifestation of Dark Flash, which I do think, as I've just gone over, is far from perfect or even good, in my opinion, if I'm being very frank here. I think what this movie has going for it is that it does have substance with the conundrum that Barry's put in, the differentiation between both Barrys, the lesson learned or maybe not learned, of which we're about to get into in a question at some point. Do you see what I mean? There's stuff there, but I don't think it was that greatly executed. You also say, I guess there was probably a lot of things cut out and left on the table. Yeah, there is apparently a 4-hour cut of this movie. Andy Muschietti has said that, but he says that this version of the movie is the best version of the movie. I would be very intrigued to see that version, but I'm not gonna lie as well. I do think a lot of that stuff was cut out because things were reshuffled, and we will be getting into that with regards to what was the older DCEU direction. Again, I always make this very clear to make a lot of people aware of it, because I see that some people aren't. There was going to be a DC reset with this movie, and that was into the new DCEU with Keaton staying on, like literally, into the Batgirl movie. Even a rumored Batman Beyond movie, Sasha Calle still carrying on. So think about all these scenes that you could have seen or that may have been removed and changed with Keaton dying in this film because of the DCU direction change. This is from AB Synth the Monk. What I didn't get was leaving the mystery of who killed Nora Allen. This is a very interesting question, and I'm sure many of you have this question as well. I thought they would maybe cleverly weave it into the ending with Dark Flash, but instead they kept the focus on freeing his father and writing it off as a botched robbery. I think it took away from the emotional impact it could have had and given us a more centered villain to the story instead of a useless cameo by Michael Shannon. What are your thoughts? Do you think that the plot was fine with how they wrote it? And I noticed in replies to this, and this is true, we have Chris Brenning saying they didn't say it was a robbery, they just showed that it wasn't Henry. True. Honestly, not touching on who killed her is the perfect way to set up the reverse Flash. It was me, Barry, coming and then revealing to Barry who did it. If done right, that would be an incredible payoff. Other people are saying, and I'm bringing this up for context of what I'm about to talk about, are also agreeing we all know it was the reverse Flash / Zoom. That will definitely be what the second film will be about if we get that sequel. Probably saving that for the sequel by Spidey here saying, and reveal it to be Thorn. So, first of all, I will say that all while I was very aware, with my intuition that is, that they weren't going to get into Reverse Flash in this movie, and they were going to kind of leave the whole murder thing fairly ambiguous, because they wanted to tackle other things, Dark Flash, everything else in the movie. I didn't expect Eobard to pop up in the same way he does in Flashpoint. I just didn't. However, I was a bit disappointed that with that scene where we start with Barry, doing his work in his bedroom, it was completely dead silent in the house. And we just heard the drop of some cutlery, like a pan, and we hear Nora groan, like exclaim in pain. And that was it. I would have felt like, even understanding that you're not going to do Reverse Flash in this movie, that there would be some kind of Easter egg. I think fans would have been like, oh, a little red glow in the house, just like 1.5 seconds. Cool. We get that you're not going to go there, but that's cool. Thank you, Andy. Didn't even do that. By the way, this isn't me massively marking down the film or anything. This is just my take on, I would have liked to have seen that. Plus, I think it's been pretty well damn established that when Barry races into the toilet, there's a big kind of, and kind of a bit of a glow, right? I think, considering it is super traditional canon for Barry's mum to die through Eobard Thawne, especially with the brutal kitchen knife in the chest, there's no reason why they couldn't have done like some kind of sound effect. Because I do want to say again, watch the scene again when you go see the movie. It is dead silent in the house. Even though we might not ever really get this sequel because that's up in the air right now, let's just assume hypothetically we did, under the timeline of where Walter Hamada is still at the top, Warner Brothers is still doing the DCEU plan with Keaton moving forward with the original ending, the Batgirl movie, Sasha Calle Supergirl staying on. Let's just say it was Reverse Flash, and I'm pretty sure, gathering from what everyone or most fans are taking as per super traditional canon, with Nora's death, it was Reverse Flash who murders her. But we can understand, okay, in the first movie, maybe he didn't want to get so into the murder of it. So, I have an issue with this. with how it currently stands, sequel or not, but hypothetically entertaining this sequel, that if they were going to, and you would have to think they inevitably would have, got into the murder of Nora, and they would have revealed it was me, Barry, that if it was the Reverse Flash, then in this movie, I think there's something to be concerned about here. Now, why, you may be thinking, why would, Boba, don't you want it to be the Reverse Flash? Why would there be an issue with Reverse Flash killing Nora? And why wouldn't you want that reveal in the future? I'm not saying I don't want that reveal, but if it is that reveal, why would there be a problem? Think about how Nora died, or why she died, and then why she didn't die with Barry's change. Nora died in the original timeline. Like, primarily, the difference here is because when she was cooking her meal, she didn't have a can of tomatoes. Like, she already had one in there, but she needed an extra can. So she sends her husband out, Henry Allen, to the grocery store to get the can of tomatoes. So he wasn't there in the house, and subsequently, as a result of that, Nora Allen dies through getting stabbed in the chest, mysteriously, and we're assuming, as super traditionalist canon, it was Eobard Thawne with his hate for Barry. He does that, right? He stabs her. The big difference with how she survives is that Barry makes sure that she has the second can of tomatoes in her shopping cart at the grocery store, so when she gets back home to cook the meal, well, she never sends Henry Allen out, right? That's the fundamental difference. Nora doesn't die because she has a second can of tomatoes. This is the bottom line. Henry Allen is still in the house. So what does that mean? This means that Reverse Flash would still be doing his thing on his way to kill Nora Allen. And as opposed to the original timeline, instead of speeding in and you know, using the negative speed force as the speedster he is, the evil speedster, and, you know, stabbing her and then quickly making a, well, quick exit. In this one, just because Henry Allen is home, he would have rocked up to the house, sees, like, I don't know, in his head, oh God, that Chad Henry Allen is there. Super Chad Henry Allen. I can't go through with this. And then he speeds away. Even the CW's Flash didn't have Eobard Thawne care about that. He just went in there. Granted, he wanted to kill Barry as a kid. And we do have some more context that is unknown in this movie's iteration of it. But the way they label it to us, if in that hypothetical sequel where they dive into, you know, the killer of Barry's mum, because it was left mysterious, and if we assume they do get into, and we're going to get into Eobard Thawne, well, they present Eobard Thawne as a bit of a scaredy cat, because the only bloody change Barry makes that keeps Nora alive and prevents Eobard Thawne from murdering Barry's mother is because he rocks up to the house again, but this time things are a little bit different. Henry Allen is at home, and he doesn't go through with it. And that wouldn't matter to Eobard Thawne, because he's a speedster. He would go in there before Barry Allen's father, Henry, could even finish a blink and be in and out. Apparently, his freaking secret weakness is Henry Allen. It stops him from being able to kill Nora somehow. As for the rest of your comment, I think it took away from the emotional impact it could have had and given us a more centered villain to the story. I get what you're saying there, but Andy Muschietti, as he said in an interview, he didn't want to straight up adapt Flashpoint, and he didn't think that'd be as interesting. Now, obviously, you can completely disagree with that, but I think I maybe know what he was going for. Like, he obviously the huge part of Barry's life and a big part to what, you know, defines his character in certain ways is the loss of his mother. And learning about that, and you can still maybe have that be a huge part of this film, which it was, and there was very touching scenes between Nora and Barry from the beginning to the very, very end. But hey, how about, you know, you can kind of drag that out even more, and I don't mean that in like a negative way. It's okay, second film where they do get into the murder, but Barry obviously doesn't know that in the story initially, but it kind of comes back again with the Reverse Flash, and as some other people have said, like, it would be a cool reveal that Barry didn't even realize was another speedster, and how this all came back into it. And he learns that in the original timeline that, you know, his mother did live. Now, he's a part of a timeline that he never even knew, and to the point of where he thought it was the original one, with his mum dying his whole life is all he's ever known. Do you know what I mean by that? Because technically, Eobard Thawne going back and stabbing his mum, technically, if he never did that, he would have always had his mum. That kind of thing. All of these revelations to Ezra's Barry, learning that in the future would have been really cool. So that's why maybe Andy didn't want to like shove that all in the first film and could do maybe more about a conflict of self and perhaps milk the whole dramatic reverse Flash factor another time. So Jay Turner here asks, do you think that the original post-credit scene and the Abdi / DeLuca should have stayed in? So the original ending, as we know and as we've somewhat already been over, is Michael Keaton is there. There's even photos of them filming basically the scene you saw with George Clooney, but with Keaton. Now, the post-credit scenes, I believe, were meant to surround Ben Affleck, like still showing that he's like, hey, I'm still out here, but like in a different universe. And that's because when Barry travels back, obviously he's in this new one with Keaton, or what is now Clooney, and so that was setting up, and as what we know from Walter Hamada, it was setting up to a Crisis on Infinite Earths event when Ben Affleck would have, under the old Warner Brothers DCEU plans, not the DCU plans, the future old DCEU plans, would have been a Crisis movie. Ben Affleck would have come back for that. So do I think that should have stayed in? In terms of like business and what James Gunn probably would want, like no, because if they're not going to deliver on that, Ben Affleck coming back, Crisis, then no, it wouldn't make sense to tease fans with that, if that makes sense, because if you're not going to get that story with Ben Affleck coming back, why put a post-credit scene in there? But then again, I guess you could argue, hey, it would have been cool to see the Ben Affleck post-credit scene. He's floating out there in another universe or something. I don't know. Maybe even if we never pick up on that again, it would have been nice to see that he's still out there. Ultimately, again, when you realize the amount of self-cannibalizing that this movie has had because of all the changes, it starts to become a bit of a headache, which is why we really need to get these movies out the way and just enter the new status quo. Because even though this, again, is meant to be the reset, it still doesn't feel like there's a clearly defined status quo, because people are asking these questions. Is Clooney the new DCU Batman? Or it's like, okay, I realize he's not the DCU Batman, but why bring him in? And that's another thing. If you're not going to bring in Clooney as the DCU Batman as we understand it, why not just keep Keaton there? Like, we understand that Batgirl's cancelled. We understand that the future DCEU plans were cancelled. Like, he's not staying on as the Bruce Wayne overlooking all the future DCEU movies. So, you know, why not just like keep him in? If Ezra's going to be in this other timeline anyway, why not in our headcanon just, you know, keep him in there and Supergirl? But maybe it really is for optics. Like, people will go out of that, even if it's not fans, but general audience, maybe new fans, like lots of people at the end of the day, if they ended it in the original way, maybe, and I can somewhat understand this, if you end it with like, hey, Keaton's here, hey, like Supergirl's here, like we're in this new timeline, it does infer we're going to see those people again. But we're not, as we understand it. Like, we're not. But now people are actually wondering if Clooney is going to be seen again in Gunn's new DCU. So it kind of redundantly has the same effect. So it's just what I mean, man. It's just messy. It's messy. It's weird. Which is, again, is why we need to get past this bloody phase. So Mr. Deathstorm says, people said Ezra was overacting. Do you agree? No. The older Barry finally wound things back to a level of maturity that, as I said in my spoiler-free review, made me a lot more on board with Ezra's take on Barry's character. Like, it was so much more slowed down. The acting was great, especially when you got to the more emotional scenes. Maybe this is more about the younger Barry, but that's more of a deliberate choice, being college age, being a completely different Barry as well, who grew up with parents that, you know, I do get it, the whole kind of laugh. It's just like, if I heard that on repeat, I think I would go insane pretty quickly. But that's not overacting either. And even then, sometimes that Barry was chill, even when he was kind of being annoying. So ultimately, long story short, no, I don't think Ezra was overacting at all. If anything, Ezra was really fantastic in this movie. So the Lemonhead asks, do you think that Barry didn't develop as a character? In the beginning, he said something like this: I can't interact with anything, so I'll do something small. Then at the very end, he did something small, moved the cans to the top shelf. I don't think he really developed. Yeah, the thing that I find weird is, if you know that such a small timeline change can have big effects, then yeah, even at the very end, changing the tomato cans from the middle of the shelf to the top of the shelf, so Henry Allen looks up, and now he's no longer in jail. Look, some people may get annoyed at this, but it does kind of infer that Barry hasn't learned his lesson. I mean, the movie presents it like he has, and he can have this one thing. I get what they're going for there. Like, on the surface level, like, Barry's been through all this trauma. He has to let his mum die, knowing that she exists in time in some place. But he gets this one thing, though, like Henry Allen getting out of jail, because obviously it's very depressing knowing that they recovered CCTV footage for it to be him in a cap, and he never looks up. So he gets this one thing. But that one thing does indicate, like, thematically that he kind of hasn't learned. And, like, why is he surprised at the end of the movie that through having your father no longer be in jail at the end, why are you surprised that Clooney, or Bruce Wayne looks different? I hope that's just not investigated the same way the Marty McFly joke was investigated in the movie. And I keep referencing that because why did it take so long for Barry to realize, after realizing all these other changes, that Back to the Future was different? That dragged on way too long. It doesn't make sense. He realizes so many things, but not that. I would say that Barry develops, but then the film kind of went back a little bit on itself at the end there. I mean, I do like it, at face value, but Barry still changes and F's with the timeline. So he's in a different timeline, technically, than the one he would want to get back to. You could argue that maybe Henry Allen staying in jail for the rest of his life versus not isn't going to have a huge ripple in the timeline, but it does. Like, Henry Allen would have stayed in jail for the rest of his life and died there, right? Now he's not in jail, and he's going to be outside in the world. Imagine all the butterfly effects that could have, interacting at the store every day, doing this, that, and the other. So Barry should know this. Like, if he didn't even want to interact or do something too much in the past other than, change the tomatoes situation to save Nora, yet he's got to now introduce a whole new ripple effect of Henry Allen being out there in the world when he never would have been, because of, unfortunately, wearing a baseball cap to the store kept him in prison. Yeah, I know I'm going around in circles, but it kind of does show that he didn't learn that lesson. Because he did it again at the end of the movie. I mean, what do you guys think of this? Up next from the Potato Guru saying, now that you've seen the film, what are your thoughts on the studio's official stance for the lack of Grant Gustin as availability? They had cameos from folks no longer with us, which somewhat makes sense, and they spent time, money, and effort rendering a scene from an unproduced Superman film, which made no sense. That issue required likeness rights. They could have easily rendered the Arrowverse into film using the same CGI process, and it certainly would have made more canonical sense given the Crisis crossover. No, yeah, so with this one, with the excuse out there, I don't believe it. What doesn't make sense to me with what Andy Muschietti has said, or like whatever anyone has said, is why did they bring in Teddy Sears? Even though it was more his likeness, it was like CGI'd onto the face. That speedster we saw running. You don't have John Wesley Shipp's Flash, a live-action Flash, and you don't have Grant Gustin's Flash. You have something. You have it's fair enough. It's Jay Garrick, cool, it's the Flash, but like you do. And even Titans used some stock footage of Grant Gustin's Flash. They could have even done that. I mean, look at that frickin', Chrono Bowl. Like, they could have worked that in there somehow. Yeah, it's a very confusing situation. I really don't understand it. If you're paying, like, homage to Flashes, or, like, you would think you would, and your intention is to honor DC with all these cameos and, say what you will there, because I've seen lots of people say, there's Brandon Routh there. They could use stock footage instead of, like, doing what they did with Christopher Reeve and stuff. But like with Grant Gustin, like at the very minimum, there would have been easy ways to implement that in with stock footage. So, without going around in circles here, yeah, I don't get it. Like, why wouldn't you pay tribute to one of the previous Flashes? I'm not like majorly like pissed off about it or anything. It's just like, I don't get it. Now, I know what they didn't. They've already talked about how they wanted to include more cameos in that scene, like Linda Carter and things like that, but they didn't want it to go on forever. But like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, you use this Flash, you could have used stock footage of Grant Gustin and worked that in there somehow. Like, I'm pretty sure they could have. So Blue Blamkiss says, how do you feel about the CGI in the movie? I know the director gave a statement saying that since the Flash's view when running and in the dome is skewed or warped, they wanted to convey that. Do you feel like that statement is a cop-out, or do you agree? I personally felt that it looks unfinished / unpolished, and I could believe that dome part, but not the entire movie in scenes that weren't warped. Example, the baby shower or Kara fighting. See, yeah, I'm of that opinion as well. I think he said here, we are in the perspective of the Flash. Everything is distorted in terms of lights and textures. We enter this water world, which is basically being in Barry's point of view. It was part of the design, so if it looks a little weird to you, that was intended. A lot of people were clowning on it, saying, so you intended to make it look bad, which can be a perspective, because a lot of people do think that the Chronoball stuff looks bad, so they're saying the way it looks to them, they obviously were okay with, but to a lot of people it looks bad, and it was intentional, so you can make that kind of joke from it. And, you know, with the actual excuse here, it's like, okay, if I really put myself in his shoes of assuming to believe him there, and I don't want to believe Andy Muschietti's lying, it's just like, okay, I get what you're saying. If you've run faster than the speed of light to get to Chronoball phase, you know, in that stadium of like timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff, then you could argue that light, if you've ran faster than the speed of light, and the textures maybe, would be a bit different. But what I would say to that is, it looks so bad, man, that I don't agree with this creative decision. Just do like even what, like, and yes, I'm bringing it up, or what, like, I think maybe another project, if they did a live-action Flash movie, would do, or Superman or whatever, that if somebody is entering Flash time, and what I mean by that is they're in Flash time, but you're seeing it slow-mo, you just see the actor pause there. Like, take a photo, a 360 photo, I don't know, and they're just like, you know, the detail is there. I get what he's saying. Like, I can't deny that maybe light would work a bit differently. But what I would ultimately say with the Chronoball stuff, I'm not even talking about the cameos, by the way. I'm talking about even when he first travels back in time in the movie, and you see like the sandwich guy there. You see the 18th birthday. No, maybe that's a little bit later when he runs back again. But like Nora Allen and stuff. It's really, 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 really bad, in my opinion. Some people don't mind it. Like, if you're one of those people, that's fine. But even with your logical excuse, it would be like, okay, I get the reasoning for this, but the way it looks, let's not do it that way. Let's try and figure some other way. But going to the main point here with this question, Blue Blamkiss says, yeah, maybe that could have still looked more polished or whatever. Maybe you can believe Andy Muschietti when he says that, but not the entire movie in the scenes that weren't warped. I agree. Look, I've had some blowback on this. Some people agree with me. I think it may depend if you go to an IMAX screening, maybe. I don't actually think it should, but maybe some people don't notice it as much. That's something as well. And I do think a more trained eye exists with some people. I've seen some people say that the CGI in the movie has been flawless. I'm sorry, but I fundamentally disagree with that. And I'm not talking about any Chronoball scenes now. I'm talking about the movie itself, with both Barrys in the same scene when we get to the battlefield, and you have the young Barry talking about, going after Mistress Murderer and all the other Kryptonians, and the older Barry's just like in his Flash suit saying, oh, don't worry about that, you'll be okay, we're going to go for the other Kryptonians. He's like a whole ass CGI model. They didn't even get Ezra in the suit for that. They rendered a 3D model of Ezra and lip synced the lines to him, and his face is all like this, and it's absolutely unacceptable to me with a blockbuster comic book movie that aspires to be of a very high caliber and leans heavily on visual effects. I noticed that so much, and I honestly, believe it or not, with how much I have gone on about it, I'm not that nitpicky with CGI in a movie. I can kind of be like, okay, maybe that could be a bit more polished, but like whatever, right? I'm normally like that, but this one was painstakingly obvious for me. It's funny, a lot of people are talking about the CGI in the Chronoball, obviously, because of how distinct that is, whether you believe it's a creative choice or not. Whether it is or whether it isn't, no matter what, I don't think they should have gone for that. But what about the CGI outside any of the Speed Force scenes? There's a lot to be said there. So how do I feel about the CGI in this movie? I will say it, I've said it once and I'll say it again, unsatisfactory. Simple as that. So up next from Dark Knight Rayleigh, what is your opinion of Sasha's performance? Do you think Gunn will keep her for a future project as Supergirl? Also, this movie is as good as Dark Knight. So on the latter, no. What's my opinion of Sasha? I thought Sasha did a good job. I think my thing here is, and this is absolutely nothing against Sasha Calle. I thought she was great, like in the role. I even said in my No Spoilers review, I thought she enveloped the character really well. I think what I'm struggling to see is I feel like we barely had her. I think that's my biggest issue, and it's a compliment to Sasha in terms of I feel like I want more of her. And if you really evaluate it, like after she got rescued, she had a cool action sequence of which we saw in the trailer. After that, she flies away after soaking up in the sun, and then she conveniently comes back in. I mean, like, seriously, it's true. She conveniently comes back in when Barry needs to be flown into the sky for another convenient moment of when the lightning happens to hit him to give him his powers. And then before you know it, like, nothing really more after that. Like, one more scene in the Batcave of her saying, "I'll help you." And then the Zod battle where 3/4 of her appearances in that are VFX. It's like there's not a lot there. So again, I think her performance was way more than good enough for the role of Kara that she played in the movie. But I just feels like people were seeing a whole Supergirl movie that I didn't see, where to me it feels like she was, it's like one breadcrumb here, one breadcrumb there, and then like this bit's the battle, a few more breadcrumbs, and then that's it. That's all we saw. But for what she did have, it was good. Now will Gunn keep it for future projects as Supergirl? I really don't know. It is possible, because the one thing that always put me off the idea, like believing in it, is that Sasha Calle's Supergirl with the Flash movie seems quite fundamentally different from what they're going to go with Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow in the DCU. But then again, considering how if George Clooney, from what we understand and from what Gunn is saying, is not the DCU Batman, this means that Ezra's in that timeline, and the DCU is going to be in this timeline. Well, you can still technically have Sasha Calle's Supergirl just in James Gunn's DC universe, if that makes sense. It's just not the same one we saw in the Flash movie. So you can lean into a new kind of origin. It's not going to be the one who was held captive in the Flash movie. Does that make sense? Because right now, when you evaluate what we had with her there, it doesn't really make sense. But given that the timeline's been screwed with, as I said, with all this feckery in so many ways, then yeah, you could. Like, there is technically no reason why Gunn couldn't be like, well, the DCU is clearly not following the Clooney Batman route, so clearly a different timeline in the DCU with some adjacent characters. Why not keep Sasha Calle on? The only reason is it's Gunn's decision at the end of the day. He may really like her, just like apparently he really likes Cavill, but his vision just simply isn't that. And he might be like, for Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, this is the Kara I see. This is the story I see. Maybe business-wise, no matter what you may think of the Flash movie, he might want the optics to look a bit different from the Supergirl in the Flash movie, despite how good Sasha's performance was. It's such a weird subject, honestly, to really get into without really knowing what's going on in these people's minds. You can definitely label lots of different decision factors that may go into it, whether you agree or disagree with it. Do I think he will keep her? It's kind of hard to say. Right now, if I was to put it in a percentage, like intuition-wise, I would say 65% tells me that he's not going to keep her, and 35% that he will. Maybe even a bit more than 65%. I just feel like it's more likely that he won't keep Sasha. But maybe, and I hope I'm wrong there, he might be like, you know what? Like, we're not doing some things with the Flash movie, Ezra Miller, maybe. Some other things, Clooney. We're getting a new DC Batman. But I tell you what, we're keeping Sasha. I could imagine a world where that happens, but right now it's a very hard bet to possibly predict. So up next from iRay saying, why didn't Wonder Woman's costume change? Why change Batfleck's costume? The only answer I could say here is, like, I guess they like Wonder Woman's costume and they thought, maybe we could sell more toys changing, because that's the real answer, right? You normally change a superhero suit to kind of, get into the merchandise game. But unfortunately, and I agree with this, most people aren't really on board with Batfleck's new suit. Some of you may like it, fair enough. And it's not like I hate it. It's just when you look at it, I think, people don't like the kind of exoskeletal kind of like Under Armour look that he has on the side and other bits here and there. It just basically doesn't look as cool as some of his other suits that we've seen. Yeah, why change it? Must be merch, and maybe they thought it looked good as well. I don't know. But Wonder Woman's, maybe just because she has such a short appearance, they're not really going to change Wonder Woman's suit as much, and it doesn't really change much anyway from what we saw from the first Wonder Woman movie to that of 84, just in color and saturation. So to have a massive change or even a subtle change in Wonder Woman's suit would have kind of been a bit of news to talk about if you think about it. So since she has an even smaller appearance than what Ben Affleck's Batman did, yeah, that's probably why it didn't change compared to Batfleck's. So Son of Grey asked me, what is your opinion on the way Batfleck was handled? His action scene, lines, his cowl looked a bit weird to me. So I went over this quite a bit in my No Spoilers review. I thought he was handled fine. I get what people were saying when the Lasso of Truth moment came on. It got a bit Joss Whedon-y-esque humor. I mean, I don't know how to feel about that because I don't think any kind of humor is always necessarily the Joss Whedon type tone. I think it was just a tone of what the Lasso can do anyway and providing humor there. I don't know how to feel about it because it's like, I don't mind, it's a perfectly understandable thing to do in a way, because it's possible Batman can have the lasso around his arm. But then if you, feel like Snyder wouldn't have done that perhaps, then maybe you're like, Snyder wouldn't have done this, so this must be maybe like Whedon-esque humor. But overall, I thought Batfleck was great. I liked his action. I also, some people were mentioning that he didn't have a voice modulator. I actually, low-key, maybe it's an unpopular opinion, I don't know, prefer him without the voice modulator. I love that Batman voice when Ben Affleck gave it a bit of a lower tone to his, voice box like that. That's so much cooler to me. There are some other things that I can dig into with how, with Batman hanging over the edge with Falcone's idiot kid, as he puts it, with that deadly virus that could kill half of Gotham City by lunchtime. Would he really be in that position? Is this a Batman thing for him to, if he didn't get saved by Wonder Woman, things would have been over there and then? But then again, it's an odd thing. I'm not against League members helping out in situations like that, but Batman's been in many positions, like this before. So surely he would have had the Batman backup plan. Maybe pressing something or activating something that flies the flying fox beneath them so he can just land on that, or the fact that Alfred's on standby, something would have been done. But again, if you think about it, if Wonder Woman didn't pop up, that would have been a deadly virus killing plenty of people. It's crazy. So, if you want to get nitpicky on that, did Batman just kind of screw up there? Like, there's no way Batman can get out of that kind of thing? And I know some people will be like, oh, that's looking too into it. But, like, again, if you read any comic situation like that, let's just say you put that into a comic book frame, Ben Affleck's Batman would have somehow got out of that, and it wouldn't have been Wonder Woman. It would have been some kind of thing. So, there's things like that to consider. But overall, like, that aside, like, I really enjoyed Ben Affleck, and I thought his, the scene with him and Barry talking about how these scars we have, and there's nothing wrong or broken about Barry. I thought that was just a fantastic way for his Bruce to go out on, and especially the demeanor that he had in that scene. Sakawi and the Batman says, do you feel that the first 30 minutes were the strongest part of the movie? Because I do. Then after that, it got a bit too Justice League tone for me. With regards to the latter, I don't know, this whole Justice League tone, I think any light humor in the film is just being equated to Justice League, but maybe it's just the easiest comparison for people. But what I would say is the first 30 minutes, or just like even the first or second act, were way better than the final act of the movie. Because, right from the get-go, you get launched into it. You have a few great scenes there. You have the scene with Henry Allen on the phone to Barry, going over the CCTV evidence and how Barry wants to just, start working on the next thing. And then Henry's like, no, you kind of need to live your life. And he travels back to the childhood home. Like, all of this stuff is great. He then accidentally kind of runs back in time, which Andy Muschietti says that it's the first time he's ran faster than the speed of light, which doesn't make sense because he did that in the Snyder Cut. And some people may say, well, this movie isn't canon to the Snyder Cut, but it kind of is, because there's moments from the Snyder Cut that are recognized. Like in the Ben Affleck Batman scene, they talk about how he ran back in time in the Russian city, which only happened in the Snyder Cut. And there's other Snyder Cut references. I'm already going off on a tangent here, but all of these parts, even up until the Batcave moment, and then when, to be fair, the bit before the Batcave moment when they're in the apartment and the Marty McFly joke goes on for a bit too long, that stuff was a bit but when they get to Wayne Manor, they then go rescue Supergirl. Like I would say it doesn't like meander for too long, but then as we get into the final act again, I don't think it was like as good as like the first half of the movie, roughly. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I've been rambling for a long ass time in this spoilery biggest moments in the Flash movie breakdown opinion stuff. So let me know what you thought of all of my thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know if you want me to make a different video talking about the Flash. I don't know, there's still stuff I feel like we can talk about, but I hope you enjoyed it. So like it if you did, especially if you got this far. Consider subscribing for more videos like this. Check out my past couple. I've done a whole video going over like all new insights James Gunn has given to the new DC universe in a brand new podcast. Lots of intriguing stuff to learn about there. Some new, some old, but some also just really fascinating. But that is everything. So I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, guys, and I'll see you fellow speedsters in the next video. Goodbye.